Well, this is interesting, I think it's going to be fun. You know, I don't know if I told you, Elizabeth, that did I tell you that I got invited back to do grand rounds at the psychiatry department at
Yes, you did
University?
last time.
Yeah, and which is so exciting because you know, they obviously some of the young psychiatrists are maybe starting to take a peek in a different direction, you know. And I was reminded as I was getting ready to do this today, I was reminded of that old story about the fellow who's kind of had way too much to drink. And this fellow comes out of this building and this fella is going round and around this light post, looking everywhere. He says, "What are you looking for?" And he said, "Well, I'm looking for my keys to my car." Now, you know, if he's that inebriated, it's a good thing he's not finding them. But he says, "I'm looking for the keys to my car." And he said, well, and I've looked all around here. I said, "I can't find them." And he said, "Well, where do you last remember having them?" He said, "Well, I last remember having them over there, about 150 feet over there, that way. That's the." He said, "Well, why aren't you looking over there?" And the fellow with his inebriated language says, "Well, the light is so much better here." I think we've been looking for answers in the wrong direction, in the wrong place, in the wrong way. So I'm just going to do, you know, I'm going to go through, people know the question, this, but I don't usually do this, but I'm going to, just so we know what we're talking about, clinical depression, here's the diagnostic criteria that they've made up from research, that you have to have 5 or more of the following 9 symptoms present during the same 2-week period, and it represents a change from previous functioning. And at least one of the symptoms has to be either depressed mood or loss of interest or pleasure. So the number 1 is depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day, as indicated by either subjective report, feeling sad, empty, hopeless, or an observation made by other people that there's tearful, etc. Children and adolescents, it can be irritability. It can be that way in adults too, I would say. 2, marked diminished interest or pleasure in all or almost all activities most of the day, nearly every day, as indicated either by subjective account or observation. People say, "Gosh, he used to love to watch the sports highlights or the news highlights, or he loved this part of the paper. He loved reading this, and he doesn't do that anymore, or she doesn't do that, or I don't do that anymore. I love to read novels. I have no interest now in things that I used to have interest in." 3, significant weight loss or weight gain, of a change of more than 5% weight in a month. Decrease or increase in appetite nearly every day. Insomnia or hypersomnia. It can affect, and we can talk about that later, but it can be insomnia or hypersomnia, where you're sleeping all of the time or having trouble sleeping. Psychomotor agitation, meaning that you're kind of revved up all the time, like people are maybe sometime with 10 or 12 cups of coffee. That's just the way you are, and it's not from coffee. Or retardation, meaning mentally retarded, where you're just slowed down like somebody's. I remember as a youngster in my teenage years, late teenage years, 18 to 22, working construction during the summer, and it would get up to over 100 degrees. I remember this one summer, for 10 days, it was over 100 degrees. And it's not the Phoenix heat of 100, it's the Midwest heat of 100 with 85% humidity. And I remember even at 21 years of age, big, strong, in good shape, feeling like I was walking through mud. I could barely move and keep moving to do the work that I had to do. People that are severely depressed describe that feeling of retardation. Fatigue or loss of energy nearly every day. People say, "I just haven't got much in the tank. The slightest bit of work makes me exhausted." Feelings of worthlessness, excessive or inappropriate guilt. nearly every day. Not merely self-reproach or guilt about being sick, but just really guilt. Diminished ability to think or concentrate or indecisiveness nearly every day, either by subjective account or observed by others. Recurrent thoughts of death, not just fear of dying, recurrent suicidal ideation without a specific plan or a suicide attempt or a specific plan for committing suicide. Now, I'm going to say some things that for people that are new to this broadcast, which in our first one, I'd ask people to review it if they haven't, is that I'm going to make the case during these 12 and continue to make it that this 800-page book called the DSM-5 or the ICD-10, that there is one mental illness, and that is chronic mental stress. I was reading some research this morning from a set of articles called Defeating the Demons and the Dementors in 2012. And the Science is like, in the UK, it's equivalent to Nature, I think. They're the two of the top science magazines in the world. And I'd read the article before, but it hit me this morning that if you stress rats for 20 to 30 minutes a day, within 7 to 10 days, they exhibit our equivalent of depression, where they have many of these symptoms as an animal can have. Now, did you hear what I said, folks? I didn't say stress the rat 14 to 16 hours, or 8 to 12 hours, or 6 to 8 hours. I said 20 to 30 minutes a day. And nearly 100% of them would get depressed. Now, one of the things we've talked about, and the reason the field hasn't known what direction to look, is because there is this delusion out there that stress is something that happens to you from the outside. Does it take a deeper level of understanding to not take on stress or to not take on a lot of it? No doubt about it. But taking me away from an innate state of mental well-being, boy, that changes everything. And I know that's huge. I'm going to say a lot of things that your brain, your computer brain is going to go, what? What did he say? What did he say? Did he say what I thought he said? Because it's going to be opposite of many things of what we've been taught. I'm going to tell you that these last 9 list of symptoms that I just read off are our friends. And that depression, our mood going down, is a gift we've been given. I'm going to explain that in a moment for those that are puzzled by that. It's a gift. Having your mood go down when you're misusing power of thought, mind, thought, and consciousness is a gift. How in the hell else are you to know when you lose your way? If we're on a county road, and I think people have told me in the UK they have in places too, they have rumble strips. So that if you start to fall asleep at the wheel and you're heading for the ditch where you may flip over into even some water and drown yourself and your participant, your people in your car, what happens when you hit the rumble strip? It's unpleasant, isn't it? It's unpleasant. It's shaky. But what does it do? It wakes you up so you get back on track. Now, the problem is that most of us know when that happens, we know what to do. We know to hold firm to the wheel so we don't overcorrect and turn ourselves into somebody else coming the other direction. And we know how to get back straight and level onto the road. I think psychologically and spiritually, we haven't always known what to do when we started to feel bad. And often what we have turned to do when we felt bad has made it worse. It certainly did for me, because as Elizabeth shared, for the first, from age 20 to 41, I went in and out of clinical depression to where I would almost get immobilized. I almost didn't make it out of college, almost dropped out. I almost didn't make it out of medical school, almost didn't make it out of my residency in psychiatry. I played havoc with my marriage to my late wife for at least 10 years until we met Mr. Banks. Because whenever I got into a low mood or I started my feeling going down, I was having a lot of negative thoughts. I sped up my thinking that was out of order, and I wondered why I kept spiraling down further and further until I hit the bottom. It was like somebody pushing the down button on the elevator and then wondering why they always ended up in the basement where they wanted to get up to the penthouse. How did this happen? I'm down in the basement again. It's all dark and cold and damp, and that's not where I want to be. But I didn't know any better, and I don't think most people do, and that's what we're trying to change. We're trying to change that. I'm going to put here a note because I wanted to say it now, but I think next week is on physical, on what happens in the body, right? And stories of hope related to the principles. And I'm going to ask you if you can make a note too, Elizabeth, because I want to tell a couple of a quick story. Maybe it'll take 3 or 4 minutes that will, I think, have people wanting to listen next week. So that's a pretty powerful statement to say what I said. So hold that these are your friends. These are our friends. These symptoms are letting us know. Remember in the first talk, I said when we start getting caught up in worry, guilt, resentment, upset, overanalysis, unresolved grief, not coming to peace with losses, we activate an emergency system in our body called the HPA Axis that was meant to be activated once every 24 to 72 hours for up to 30 minutes. And I'm not going to review all the physiology that happens with that, but suffice it to say that we're going to go through it in different, as we do different of the lectures. Suffice it to say that it serves a wonderful purpose for the first 30 minutes that has saved many people's lives. It gives them powers and an ability to do things that they're not able to do regularly. However, if we continue to activate that system through stressful thinking, after 30 minutes, it starts dysregulating the chemistry in the body. It starts actually causing cell death in different places in the brain. It starts affecting the connections between different areas in the brain. Depending on your heredity, tells you which areas get most affected. And the metaphor I like is the connections between different parts of the brain that had been 4 or 6 lane highways now become gravel roads with potholes. Or you can think of, sadly, we have so much war these days, of a beautiful 6-lane highway that has been hit by 500 cluster bombs and has holes to where it's hard to even have any continuity in the road at all. And there's whole incredible research being done on what they call the connectonomics. You can even go to YouTube if you want, and the micro and macro level of connectonomics and how the connections in the brains get affected. Now, before people get terribly, oh my gosh, what kind of damage have I done to my brain? I will tell you that it's incredibly reversible. There is an innate process, and I'm going to get to that later when we'll talk about ketamine, but stay with me here. So I'm going to read two things, and I'm going to ask us to, how do we put these two together? So here's science, which, like I said, is right up there with the United Kingdom's Nature. It's incredibly respected. It speaks at a level of science that really PhD scientists in chemistry and physiology and stuff. I have 26 and a half years of education, and I understand a lot of what's in here, but a lot of it I don't understand because it's so scientific. But I want you to hear what this was a preview of articles on depression from 2012. And the names of the articles were, the summary was Defeating the Dementors, Synaptic Dysfunction in Depression, Hippocampal Neurogenesis, the Science of Resilience. So here's what the first sentence says. Depression is a devastating disease. It affects not only the directly afflicted, but also the people around them, their families, their closest relatives and relations. It indiscriminately hits all strata of society, no matter one's intellectual background, age, or economic situation. Wow. Unfortunately, for reasons we do not fully understand, I don't know if you can still hear me, Elizabeth, because I can't see you anymore. Am I still okay? Okay. Unfortunately, for reasons we still do not fully understand, this condition has been on the rise over the last few decades. And obviously, they haven't got the answer for it. I don't know if some of you might have seen that there's been an alarming rise, at least in the United States, in female teenage suicides. It's alarming. Now, so that's saying this depression, it's terrible. It's devastating. This is horrible. And you can get data on how many $1 billion and how many days of sick leave and how many disability is being paid out for depression. Now, how do you put that with this statement? This is from Dr. Tom Insel, who was the MD psychiatrist, the director of the National Institute of Mental Health for many years. He recently resigned. Here's a statement he made in 2012. Try to put this with what I just read of this devastating disease. Dr. Insel, we are so embedded in this structure. We have spent so much time diagnosing mental disorders that we actually believe they are true. They are real. We actually believe they are real. But there's no reality. They are just constructs. There's no reality to schizophrenia or depression. We may have to stop using terms like depression and schizophrenia because they are getting in our way and they are confusing things. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. He's the director of the National Institute of Mental Health. He says that there's no reality to it. We may have to stop using the term. This guy says, science says it's a devastating disease. What do I believe? We're going to try to bring these two together, but I'll read what Dr. Insel also says at the bottom. Whatever we've been doing for 5 decades, it ain't working. And when I look at the numbers of suicides, numbers of disabilities, the mortality data, it's abysmal and it's not getting any better. All the ways in which we've approached these illnesses, and with a lot of people working very hard, the outcomes we've got to this point are pretty bleak. Wow. Maybe we should start looking over there where we lost the keys, not where there's more light. So I'm going to do my best to put this, to bring those two together. I agree more with Dr. Insel that it's just a construct, that what happens when people get really stressed, we've said your mood goes down, your tension level goes up, and your body experiences pain. Those are the three first alarm systems. There are friends. You want to have pain when you put your hand on a hot stove. You want to have pain so you get your damn hand off the stove, so you minimize the tissue damage to your hand. Sadly, there are people with a disease called syringomyelia that don't have peripheral pain receptors. So they would only experience, if they did that incidentally without knowing it, when they smelled the burning flesh in their hand. They would then know to take their hand away. We are fortunate. We feel pain when we do that. We pull it away. If we could only have the understanding to start to look in a different direction when we cause ourselves to become anxious, depressed, or be in pain. There's a lot of emphasis these days in the Three Principles community on seeing that you're feeling, you're thinking 100% of the time. And that's true, and that's valuable. But I refer people, and I forget which video, and I need to get it. I was reviewing it. I had a couple come in from the United Kingdom, actually, over all the way to the United States, and they were there for a week. And we were watching together a video of Mr. Banks's, the Hawaii lectures, which occurred shortly after the 9/11 destruction in the United States. And in that video, Mr. Banks said, and I was there in Hawaii at the time, he said, and I saw when I was re-listening, kind of heard it for the first time, he said, as important as it is to know that you are feeling your thinking 100% of the time. That's crucial, it's valuable, it's incredibly important. But understanding that you are universal energy, and he used the word divine energy in a different disguise, that's what your true nature is, and that you're using that divine energy to create your experience from the inside out, moment to moment, and that you are totally mentally well, and it can never be damaged because it's spiritual. And he says it much shorter. He just said, knowing that you are divine energy in disguise is 1,000,000 times more important than knowing that you're feeling, you're thinking 100% of the time. So I just want to point people in that direction in Mr. Banks's books and videos. When I saw that I was creating my own depression, it was like I saw that for 21 years I'd been doing this, and then wondering why I had a headache at the end of the day. When I saw that I was doing it, I did not immediately experience the awareness of how to stop doing this. Now, I've told a story, and I'll tell it when we get to schizophrenia, of a man who was in the state mental hospital for 47 years. And when he had his insight, it was so powerful. He stopped hallucinating. He was on a list of medicine. He'd been in and out of, mostly in the hospital for 47 years. He turned his chair and said to me, I have seen that I have been making myself crazy for the last 47 years, which is a powerful, powerful insight. But what he also saw that I did not see in 1983, April Fool's Day, he said, and I also see that I don't have to do it anymore. Wow. And he didn't. And that's for another day. I didn't see that. I still was doing this to a considerable degree, less than before. I maybe had slowed the pace, but I was often not feeling good. And I knew now that I was doing it, but I knew to quit looking where the light was and go allow myself to be quiet, to be in the unknown, and to start looking in a different direction. That mental well-being was inside of me, and that the solution was inside of me, and it wasn't out there somewhere from something external to me. That was powerful. And I started to experience more and more and more the experience of mental well-being. One of the big, treatments of depression from the outside in, we have things like antidepressant medication, which does beat placebo, but not by a whole lot. I think the conglomeration of studies, something like 40, I don't know, if I remember right, it's 46% to about 33% antidepressants, and you take them all together versus placebo. That's pretty amazing. That a placebo, a sugar pill, 33% of the time people come out of their depression. And I remember Dr. Linda was talking about this, my wife, Dr. Linda. I remember I had her go to this program in Washington, D.C., where they were looking at research that hadn't even gotten into the public yet. And he showed these scans of people that came out of their depression and what happened in their brain from the medicines, and then what happened from the people that came out of their depression from placebo. And there were different areas of the brain. And this guy said, the medicines, it's looked like they kind of artificially tried to counter something and at least get it working, kind of what they call jury rigging here in the United States. He jury rigged it. But this even research, he said, we don't really understand this placebo response, but the most logical thing to most of us is that it's somehow activating an innate tendency to go to health. But how do we activate that? And so there's been this whole thing about the biology of belief, so that when people take a placebo in a research thing, they believe that they're going to get well. No, that's not it, because they know that they've got a 50% chance of getting placebo. But what they do know is that they're doing something. They've entered this study. They're doing something for mankind. It's going to help maybe people and themselves. And they've done what they can do. So once you've done what you can do, what do? You spend less time trying to figure it the hell out, because you're doing what you seem to do right now. And just that little bit for 1/3 of the people, or over almost 35% of the people. And there was a period of time, I used to know this research, for 4 or 5 decades, every 10 years, the placebo response was going up 7%. Gee, that placebo must be getting more and more powerful. It's funny, but people haven't looked at the very thing that's right in front of us. So then you have medicines, and then you have electroconvulsive therapy. And people shudder as some of my 3 principles colleagues, they can't believe that Bill Pettit used to do electric shock therapy. I trained at Duke. You're damn right I did. Because I had people that the best I knew how to share and teach the principles, they were still ready to blow their brains out. And I remember this one lady who discharged a shotgun. She had it right against her face, and the last minute in her closet, she turned it away. And I said, "You're coming in," and she just, or if they're delusional and they think there's something eating away from them inside, so they're not feeding, 3 to 5, 6 to 8 sessions of electroconvulsive therapy clears the slate. What does it do? It makes it impossible for people to think analytically for a little while. Now, when they get that ability back, if you don't do anything, 86% of them relapse in 12 months. If you do one medicine, if you do Pamelar, it reduces it down to 59%. If you do Pamelar and lithium, it reduces it down to 39%. Why? Because now you're trying to do, if you do ECT now once a week, and then for 4 times, and then once every 2 weeks for 4 times. But if the person is still spending 8 to 10 hours a day stressing out about things in their life, things from the past, worries about the future, they're going to keep creating the same biochemical dysregulation and turning off the same genes and turning on the same genes. I think it's funny. There's a real craze right now. Some people out there may be aware of it. You can Google it. And it's called ketamine for depression. Are you familiar with that a little bit?
I am.
So what is ketamine? They used to call it vitamin K. It was a drug of abuse. It's a horse tranquilizer. It's an anesthetic. I actually used it sometimes with electroconvulsive therapy because it doesn't raise the seizure threshold. So it actually lowers it. So as people go on, it's not harder and harder to get them to get a treatment. It's not used as an anesthetic usually in adults in regular. We didn't have any trouble with ECT, but in regular surgery, because people, when they used it, even though it's a good anesthetic, people often were combative and were striking out and hitting people as they came out of their anesthesia. I think they still use it in children when they put in ear tubes, because a good ear, nose, and throat doctor can make a little slice, put the ear tube in less than 30 or 40 seconds. Ketamine works very quickly and comes out very quickly. So you can put the child asleep for 2 minutes. Doctor does his work. He's done. Child wakes up. They have no problems. Okay. Somebody got the idea. It's a dissociator. It dissociates people's thinking from their thinking. So they gave ketamine IV in these big tertiary centers to people who had failed 2 or 3 medication trials at adequate doses for adequate length. Some of them had then even failed vagus nerve stimulation, which costs about $20,000. Some of them had then failed also ECT. Some of them had failed also transcranial deep stimulation of the brain. All of these things are purported trying to, and sometimes working to some degree. And they gave them IV ketamine, and I think the dose was something, I'd have to look it up, 40 milligrams per kilogram, or, and over, I think it's like over 6 minutes. Now here's what's amazing. These people with severe resistant depression, close to 70% of them fully remitted within 2 to 6 hours. Now, what people that don't understand how things are working, they say, holy crap, ketamine is one of the most powerful antidepressants in the world. Look what it does. Well, I'm sorry. What it does is it completely makes it impossible for people to hold on to their painful thoughts they've been carrying for years. It completely separates them from that. And what this shows, that if you can separate people from that for even 2 to 6 hours after 30 to 40 years of depression, there is an innate capacity in the body to form incredible, the amount of new cells that are made in the brain in those 2 to 6 hours is phenomenal. In the hippocampus, in the prefrontal cortex, the levels of brain-derived BNF, brain-derived anyway, it's good stuff. It goes up really high, BNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. All of this, and they're attributing it to the ketamine. Well, there's an old thing of correlation is not causation. Indirectly, it caused because the ketamine helped the people dissociate from the grip on their thinking. But because that's what it is, they are dumbfounded that in 7 to 10 days, 100% of the people are back severely depressed. Because why? Because they've gained no new understanding of how that they are spiritual energy in disguise. They've no new understanding that they're creating their experience from the past. No new understanding that the things that they feel guilty and resentment for other people, that if they really understood the principles and saw psychological innocence, that everybody, every human being, and we can go to extremes if we have the time, every human being, every moment, given their level of psychological and spiritual understanding, is making the decisions that make sense to them. You and I at our worst times also. The retrospectoscope is always 20/20. If they really had a deep understanding of these 3 universal principles and knew that they were hooked up, they were actually made of divine energy at the source of the universe, they would know that they have access to a wisdom beyond the intellect 24/7. And the idea of worrying about things or overanalyzing things would be the last thing in the world they would do. Even if they really understand what life was and what death was, that there's nothing to fear. Not that we're not human beings and we're not going to be sad if somebody close to us dies, and especially if they die young or suddenly. But at some level, we know that that's okay. We're all okay. And we're going to be okay on the other side of this. Go ahead.
Do you have a story of someone that was really suffering? I mean, obviously there's your own story, but do you have a story of someone that was really suffering and then saw this truth that you speak about? Yeah.
Well, I've had hundreds in the last 34 years, hundreds and hundreds. But one of them comes to mind. There's actually, I have to ask Judy if we get permission it'd be wonderful to be able to put it up on your website. There's a CD called After 41 Years. Have you seen that one with
no.
Yeah. So this lady is referred to me and she's 61 years old. She's been depressed for 41 years. And she's had suicide attempts when she was younger, but she knew some relatives or people that committed suicide, and she saw how devastating it was to other family members. So even at her worst, she's made a compact with herself. I will not do that. No matter how bad it gets, no matter how much emotional pain I'm in, I will not do that. Okay. She has, I tell you how depressed she's been for 41 years. She's married to a lawyer, and he's a wonderful guy. And every time people see this video, now it's 15 years ago, but the women used to always want to know if he had any first-degree relatives that were single, because he stayed with her for 41 years because he knew she had potential and he loved her. She never cooked one meal in 41 years. She never allowed him to have, he was a very social guy, never allowed him to have guests in their home to come over for an evening, not once in 41 years. She slept sometimes up to 20 hours a day. And people say, how can you say that that's a gift? Well, listen to the logic, folks. If while I'm awake, I'm spending 85 to 95% of the time I'm awake paying attention to negative thoughts and creating biochemical dysregulation in my body and turning off the healthiest genes and forcing backup genes and even illness genes to be activated that end up with fibromyalgia and illnesses and autoimmune and lupus and high blood, all the things we'll talk about next week. Then isn't it better that I only have 4 hours awake? So the most damage I could do is 3 to 4 hours of damage. And I'd have a chance to get some food in to keep me alive. Might even be able to, if somebody helps me, get a shower. And so that's a gift. And every once in a while, she would get so, and we'll go to this when we go to bipolar, she would get so depressed that suicide became an option, and she would flip into a hypomanic episode, which has saved a lot of people's lives. Every person that I've had that remembers, and when we talk about the hypomania, we'll talk about that remembers what happened before, the last thoughts before they went into their manic episode. Every one of them that remembered said they were either going to kill themselves, or one man was going to kill his wife, a lovely wife, 8 and 10-year-old boys, and then himself, because he had failed them financially and he didn't want them to live in misery. So, yeah, people are doing this universal mind is coming through us, but it's coming through us at the level of understanding that we're at. So sometimes all it can do is keep us alive. So that was where she was. And so she was referred to me because, once again, all the medication adjustments, and she was on a whole list of medications. And in the video, it has the list of high doses of probably 5 or 6 psychotropic medications. And with maneuvering those, her doctor, family doctor, who was pretty well versed in psychotropic medication, had gone to some courses, he was able to keep her alive. But now she was down to where she could hardly function. She had every one of these things. She was depressed nearly all day, nearly every day. She had no interest or pleasure in nearly anything. I don't know, forget whether her weight had been affected, but she was hypersomnic. She was sleeping 12, 14, 16 hours a day. She had no energy. She just felt like she was moving and, slowly, feeling worthlessness, feeling guilty about every mistake she'd ever made in her life, having difficulty concentrating. She was indecisive, and now having thoughts of death and even suicide. So she came to me, and he wanted a medication adjustment. And I said, no, she wanted electroconvulsive therapy. He said, this doctor will do that if that's the only answer. And I said, would you please be willing to see me once? Come this time, let me talk to you. I think I asked her to watch a couple of the videos, come to 3 group sessions, and then we'll talk again, and we'll see. We'll see. So she came to group, and the second or third time she came to group, she got so frustrated. I was reading something from Missing Link, and she stood up and she yelled, and it was right at the end of the group. She said, "Does anybody know what he's talking about?" And she says on the tape, she says, I think the group ended then. And she went out to her car, and I was afraid of her driving in that state of mind. So I followed her out to the car, and I asked her, I said, the group is over. Would you come in my office? And I called my wife, and I said, I'm going to be a while. And she's she very tearfully talks about it. She said he sat with me for 2 hours. And at the end of those 2 hours, I don't know what happened. But the next day, she was a very religious lady, a Catholic. She went to, they had what they call the Eucharist, where the Eucharist, which is supposed to be God in this form of a Eucharist, and people sit an hour at a time. And she was sitting there, and I wished I had the tape. I will bring it, the poem, next time. She wrote a poem that's just very beautiful, and it came to her. It's like 8 four-line stanzas, and it came to her, and her Beck depression score went from 39 to 2. A Beck depression score over 14, I think it is pretty severe depression. Hers was 39. It went down to 2, and it never got very high after that. And she talks about, she said, I suddenly realized that I had this health inside of me, and it would keep rearing its ugly head even when I kept trying to push it down. That it was stronger than I was. And of course, I had been exhausted and fatigued all these years because I was spending so much energy keeping it down when it was trying to come through and fill me up with joy and lightheartedness and love. And she talked about, she said, I love my husband. I used to love my husband. I've always loved him because he loved me and the way he treated me. But the love I have for my husband is totally different now. I love him because of the love I have for him, and I would do anything for him. And I feel all this love. I just feel it. I want to share it. But she was sleeping 8 hours a night. She was very calm, very loving, very, but she finally came to realize after 41 years that that it was always there. It was always there. So she's one of many. There's a little thing on YouTube that I might have referred people to where if you YouTube and you go Stories of Hope, Dr. Pettit, it has 4 people talking one after another of what happened for them as they saw the principles. One of the ladies was a nurse whose father had committed suicide and came to me saying that she had put a date, locked it in a little lockbox, and had the date that she was going to commit suicide. And she would not tell me, of course, what the date was. But I said, well, I appreciate you coming here, so let's do what we can. I'm aware of the time. It's got away from me here. I need to take questions. But anyway, yeah, it's there all the time. Yeah.
I was just about to stop you for questions. So
yeah.
If you could raise your hand, if you've got a question, or you can type it on the chat. It's up to you. But I actually am going to ask you a question.
Okay.
So to kick off, which is, so people are already feeling very depressed. They're already kind of being quite hard on themselves. Mm-hmm. They're already feeling guilty and low. And you know, what you saw was that you were doing it to yourself.
Right.
What would you say about telling people in that state of mind that they're doing it to themselves?
Well, to me, it was the most exciting thing I'd ever heard in my life. It was wonderful news, because if it was being caused by the things I thought it was being caused by, I was screwed, Elizabeth, because some of them were things that had already happened. Some of them were things that were happening right now, but I had no control over. And there were ways people and other things were interacting that I had no control over. If that's what's causing my depression, I'm screwed. If I'm innocently the creator of this experience, and the experience is actually my friend, a gift that's been given me to try to show me that I'm going the wrong way, then why would I not get excited? I thought of a metaphor earlier today. I actually had another call. And my wife's got a car. I'll do this quick. She has a car that almost drives itself, and not quite, but it does things like if somebody cuts in front of you on the highway and stays too close to you, it suddenly brakes you. So you're driving, and all of a sudden you're braking. It's shocking sometimes at the beginning because I'm not braking, but it's keeping me safe. And so I said, let's say that I put in my GPS and there were 4 cities and they weren't Mesa, Tempe, Glendale, and Phoenix. They were the city that you put in your GPS was lightheartedness, love, happiness, and contentment. It's 4 cities that had grown together. And you put that in your GPS. But then anytime you turned your car off the glide path to those 4 cities, your car started jerking and doing things that made it very uncomfortable to hold the steering wheel, and things got really hard and upsetting. And that would be wonderful because it'd be telling me to stop, get quiet, look at my GPS and say, oh shit, I made a wrong turn. If that car didn't do that, I might go 400 miles in the wrong direction. And I might even drive over a cliff.
So I guess some people might be wondering, how do you stop that thinking and look in this? I love this idea of a different direction, but where am I meant to look?
The day that you stop trying to do anything with your thinking. You know, the research has shown, and I've got the book right here for those that want to do research. It's called Mindfulness. This is not about mindfulness, but the research was brilliant. They showed that people that didn't relapse from that 200 people got well from therapy for depression, cognitive, which aims at trying to change what you're thinking. This is about being aware that you are the thinker and that you're a spiritual being. 200 people recovered, 100 of them, they took 100 people that relapsed and 100 that didn't. Now, by the theory, it would be, and they measured how much negative thinking they were having on a daily basis. Okay, are you with me? By the theory, the people that didn't relapse should have much less negative thinking, true, than the people that relapsed. There was no difference.
Wow.
There was no difference. But the people that didn't relapse didn't care if they had negative thoughts. They didn't care. They had decentered from them.
Brilliant.
Now, if you understand the principles, that's not a technique. It's not a hard thing to do. You just know that when your feeling level is, if you're feeling you're thinking 100% of the time, when your feeling level is, when your thinking is taking you away from a good feeling, it's time to leave your thinking alone for a while and do the best you can to just be present in your life. As best as you can. And that's what those people had done. They had learned something beyond the theory of cognitive behavior therapy. They had learned that it didn't matter if you had negative thoughts if you didn't give them a lot of attention. If you left them alone, that they went their way like every other thought does. That's why we can't remember shit, pardon me, but that's why we can't remember, because thought is always being pushed out by another thought. If we just, and we have inside of us, we have cork in our butt that will take us back to the surface if we let go of the weights we've been holding on to. And it's just about learning to not try to, as I've read this page of 106 so many times, it says, if your thoughts wander onto a negative and rocky path, don't take them too seriously. Refrain from analyzing, because I guarantee you, you will analyze yourself forever, reaching an end, and fail bitterly to find peace of mind. Now notice, I always say Woody Allen in that movie Sleeper, He was asleep for 20 years. And when he woke up, he said, oh my gosh, 20 years. I could have been halfway through my analysis. Notice that Sid doesn't say, if your thoughts wander onto a negative and rocky path, he doesn't say fight them like hell. He doesn't say try to push them out of your head. He doesn't say try really hard to think positive thoughts. He says don't take them too seriously. Let your negative thoughts go. They are nothing more than passing thoughts. You are then on your way to finding the peace of mind that you seek, having healthier feelings for yourself and for others. This is simple logic. So for those people, I would say read Mr. Banks's 6 books. I would say watch the videos that are free on the 3PGC website, the Long Beach tapes. I would say that find a teacher who is grounded in Sid Banks's source material. And you will, I had a man recently, well, you know, you said stories. I had a man recently from across the pond in one of those European countries who had been depressed. He was 50 some years old for 43 years since he was 12. And he was holding on to, part of it was his whole way of understanding, but he had been holding on to bitterness towards somebody in his life since 12 years old. Mm-hmm. And we were on the third session going through the missing link. And he said, Bill, he told me a few hours after, he said, I don't know what happened, but it's gone. My depression is gone. Now he's still wanting to learn deeper and not to take on stress. He sees, now he's even much more aware when he takes on stress that he thought was just normal before. So he's wanting to deepen and deepen, but the depression is gone after 43 years.
Yes, and it's interesting. People can get more sensitive to that, you know, and catch it quicker. Somebody's just commented, I realize I'm depressed when I've got suicidal thinking, but you can start to get even more aware of your rumble strip on the road even earlier.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't mean to be corny, but if I haven't had a hearty laugh by noon, I know that I'm taking life way too seriously.
Yeah.
Life is way too important to take seriously.
Totally.
Now, people think that sometimes they say, well, that's irresponsible. I will take any 10 people that are in a lighthearted, loving feeling against people that are in serious, responsible thinking anytime and see who's the most responsible. I love Mr. Banks's quote. He says in Enlightened Gardener, he said, mental stress and distress is to mental illness as damp and dark is to fungus. It makes it grow. And I would put seriousness right in there with mental distress, because I don't know anybody that can get into seriousness and not experience mental distress. On the other hand, he says, love and lightheartedness is to mental illness as sunlight and dry is to fungus. It eradicates it. It eradicates it.
We're going to go slightly over tonight, folks, so feel free to leave. But there's one question that I want to ask on behalf of Kate, because I think so many of us feel like this at times. We see something about the principles if we do for ourselves, and we do really see others suffering with depression, and we don't know what to do really. And so what would be your advice, you know, when you've got someone you care about or someone you work with and you can see that they're suffering in their depressionic state and they're very attached to their story about why they're depressed? What would you say to that?
What would I do?
Yeah. How would you approach that? What would you advise us in that situation?
I would, if I didn't know what to do, I would deepen my own understanding.
Yeah.
But and then I'd listen for wisdom. But in the meantime, I would love that person unconditionally without any judgment. Unconditional love is incredibly healing. But when people are trying to change you, people feel that.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that the answer is always unconditional love. And in a state of unconditional love for somebody that's close to you, you will be guided in that state of love to know exactly what to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's that simple. People want to make it complicated. Now, do you and I have control over other people's lives? No, or what they do. I had a good friend whose daughter was severely anorexic and depressed and had been hospitalized and looked like she was going to die. And she was hundreds of miles away. And the mother was worrying about her daughter, because God knows it's important that you worry because it shows that you care. And she had no idea what a burden that added to her daughter, her worry. And she came to a point where she told me, Dr. Pettit, I had this moment of awakening where I thought, I'm part of the problem. I'm not part of the solution. I love my daughter totally and with my whole heart and soul, and she may die, but I am going to love her every moment that I have her. And I'm going to let her know that I'm no longer going to be worrying about her, that I will do whatever I can. If there's anything she ever sees or wants, I will do that. But in the meantime, I'm not going to be worrying. I'm just going to be loving her. And she meant it. It wasn't just the words. You can't say words if you don't mean them. Her daughter healed incredibly quickly within the next 3 weeks. And she told her later, Mom, the day that you stopped worrying about me relieved such a burden from my heart that it allowed me to heal.
Oh, that's so incredibly moving. Oh, Bill, we just want to spend all day and night with you, and we're going to get lucky, so lucky, because we're going to have 12 sessions. And guys, I'm going to let you know all the subjects, but PTSD, trauma, physical, the relationship between thought and physical illness. We're going to look at mental disorders of like autism and those kind of OCD things, anxiety. We're going to go further into in various different ways, personality disorders. We're going to look at schizophrenia, bipolar. But I'll be sending you a list of we're basically going to go on a journey. Leela said, like when you go on safari, you're going to do see the big 5. That's what we're going to do. We're going to do the big 12. And then we're going to do a whole session, the last one on your questions. So we'll create a format for doing that. But I wanted to let you know that was coming. And we're going to obviously make the podcast available. Please share these podcasts. Give really the idea that why Bill and I want to do this is we want to make this information, this education, this understanding available to people that are currently suffering, so they can have hope for real change. And so we're collaborating on this, and whenever I look at how many times the podcasts have been listened to, every time it's higher. Bill and I it's why we're doing it. But I wanted to give the final word to Leela, who's been on the call and listening in, because she's also a Dr. Bill fan. So Leela, over to you. I'm just going to unmute you. Is there anything you'd like to say? Welcome, Leela. Anything you'd like to say in closing?
Well, it's so funny. I had something I was going to say, but I got so choked up by that story about the anorexic. It's made me a little bit, it was just very, very, it was just really that knocked me over the side a bit. But I just loved it. And I think the safari is quite a beautiful example, because I've said this before, but what astounds and always heartens me about Bill is he's discovering, he's so unafraid of the mind and biology and human potential. It's like he's on safari, like he's not frightened of those things. And you don't know you're doing something until you hear it another way. My head spun a 360 when I've heard you say it, but I really heard it deeper today. that symptoms are your friend.
They're friends. Yeah.
And it's so lovely. I think this offers so much this offers, you have people who've suffered from depression, but I think it's also for people with family members, also practitioners, also people working within the field. I mean, it has so many offerings, but I've been thinking a lot today about people who are trying to understand people who are suffering that are close to them. I think to not feel frightened, not to feel frightened of it, and to start to see the wisdom in that was just really, really fabulous. And as a practitioner, you don't realize how set your ideas got until you go, hang on a second, what did you just say? It was amazing. You're on fire today, and what just such a valuable contribution to the world. And anybody, even if they don't think depression is relevant to them, the mind and the human capability, everybody should listen. Thank you so much. I'm literally floored. Thank you very, very much, both of you, really.
Very welcome. One of my favorite quotes is, "There is always hope because there is always health."
Oh, that's amazing. Beautiful. Thank you, everybody. We'll be back in 2 weeks. We'll talk about physical relationship between mental and the physical. I'll let you know. Please share. Please get people along. We want to share this understanding with as many people as
we're going to talk to the answer, because there are going to be stories of hope there, dramatic, where people that had severe pain for 25 years and 20 years that disappeared with one thought, with one understanding. So tune in.
Yeah.
One thought changes everything.
One thought changes everything. Anybody
listening to these podcasts, if you have a shift in your understanding from listening to them, that would be so meaningful. If you heard something in this did something for you, whether it was with working with people, with your family, or yourself, I think it would be really lovely to hear stories of change of people who've just come across these audios.
Maybe we should have number 13, which would be 4 or 5
stories of change.
Stories of change from the series of 12.
Okay, done. But that's it. Vegas doesn't. No more for you. Listen, I just need to say that Mary has said that she sent the link about the first episode. We're going to interview Mary's friend, because Mary's friend has bipolar, and Mary sent her the link of the first episode, Chronic Mental Stress, and she got the insight that she was causing a lot of her own problems and sounded exciting. So we've got our first story from number 13. Awesome. And so guys, talk to us on the Real Change Portal Facebook group. Tell us about what you thought of tonight. Tell us any stories. We'll be back. We'll be, back in 2 weeks, and I'm going to say goodnight. And thank you, everybody. And I'll unmute you all to say goodnight.